Oh yes. Well, a happy life is very simple. You the first rule of a happy life is low expectations. That's one you can easily arrange. And if you have unrealistic expectations, you're going to be miserable all your life.
Our next shareholder question comes from Simon Jacobs. He writes, many observers see market behavior that reminds them of the dot-com bubble, wild speculation, endless SPACs and IPOs soaring on their first day of trading. Do you agree that there is a close parallel to the late 90s and this is therefore, quote, quote, must end badly?
Yes, I think it must end badly, but I don't know when.
You know, another shareholder, Bill Roberts, asked about SPACs, and he points out it seems like everyone, including actors, athletes, singers, and politicians, are getting into the business of promoting their own SPAC. Why do you think all these SPACs and the promoter? What do you think of all of the SPACs and the promoters pushing them?
Well, I don't participate at all, and I think the world would be better off without them. I think this kind of crazy speculation in enterprises not even found or picked out yet is a sign of an irritating bubble. It's just that the investment banking profession will sell shit as long as it can be sold.
Richard Lewis from Culver City, California, he asks, Charlie, last February, you spoke about the wretched excess in the financial system. Given the developments over the past year, could you give us an update on your assessment of wretched excess in the system? Where does it appear most egregious?
Well, it's most egregious in the momentum trading by novice investors lured in by new types of brokerage operation like Robinhood. And I think all of this activity is regrettable. I think civilization would do better without it. You'll remember that when the first big bubble came, which was the South Sea bubble in England back in the 1700s, it created such havoc eventually when it blew up that England didn't allow hardly any public trading in securities of any companies for decades thereafter. It just created the most unholy mess. So human greed and the aggression of the brokerage community creates these bubbles from time to time. And I think wise people just stay out of them.
Our next question comes from Achit Patel. He says, Charlie, in your past speeches, you have mentioned the term functional equivalent of embezzlement to describe situations where bubbles can form because both parties involved in a bubble believe the asset to be worth more than it truly is. Can U.S. Treasury bonds be such a case today? And what are the implications since Treasury assets underpin the value of every other asset? Thank you for all you do to educate us.
Well, no, I don't think we have a bubble in Treasury securities. I think they're a bad investment when interest rates are this low, and I never buy any, neither does the Daily Journal. But no, I don't think Treasury securities are a big problem. I do think that we don't know what these artificial low interest rates are going to do or how the economy is going to work in the future as governments print all this extra money. And the only opinion I have there is that I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen for sure. Larry Summers has recently been quoted as being worried that we have too much stimulus. And I don't know whether he's right or not.
Richard Saunders would like to know, should there be a tax on buying stock now that Robinhood trades are free?
Well, Robinhood trades are not free. When you pay for order flow, you're probably charging your customers more and pretending to be free. It's a very dishonorable, low-grade way to talk. And And nobody should believe that Robinhood's trades are free.
We have a question from Simon Jacobs. He writes, many believe that inequality accelerated by this pandemic has reached alarming levels that demands drastic solutions, such as a wealth tax. Do you agree with the premise? And if so, how would you address inequality?
Well, I think any rich nation ought to have a social safety net that expands a little with its wealth. And that's what we've been doing through my whole lifetime, and I applaud the result. And I think the result would have been worse if either party had been in control all by itself for the whole period. In other words, I think the system of checks and balances and elections that our founders gave us actually gave us pretty much the right policies during my lifetime. And I hope that that will continue in the future. But I do think politics is getting more full of hatred and irrationality than it used to be in America, and I don't think that's good.
Alan Smolinski asked, Charlie, many major businesses and high net worth individuals have been leaving California. Can you speak to the causes, the trend, and make some predictions?
Yes, I think that is rising as we sit here. I just see more and more of the rich people leaving. And of course, I think it's vastly stupid for any state to be user-friendly to the rich people. They do way more good than harm. And they lose their money fast enough. You don't need to worry about them. And so I think the policy, Washington State is actually considering a wealth tax at the state level. I think that would be insanity. I predict that if they do that, a lot of people will leave Washington.
Brian Chin from Los Angeles asks, with all the work from home with Zoom and other technology, what do you think the future of commercial real estate looks like?
Well, real estate has always been a difficult field, and some types of real estate in recent years has been particularly difficult. I think office buildings are now in some trouble, and of course, commercial real estate rented to stores has been in a lot of trouble for a long time. Apartments have come through better, but I don't think I've got a lot to contribute to it. I own some apartment houses, so I like that investment, provided you've got a perfect management, which is hard to get.
Okay, Vic Aurora asked, what advice would you give to someone who is trying to stay within their circle of competence, but finding that the pace of technological innovation is rapidly reducing that circle?
Well, yeah. Of course, if they bring in a brand new technology you don't understand at all, you're at something of a disadvantage. And my advice would be, if you have a fixable disadvantage, remove it. And if it's unfixable, learn to live without it. What else can you do? You fix what can be fixed, and what can't be fixed, you endure.
Frank Wong from Houston, you are one of the oldest and greatest thinkers of our time. Any tips for someone who wants to work on and improve their ability to hold two opposing views at the same time? Any tips on how to generate insight in these types of situations?
Well, I do have a tip. At times in my life, I've put myself to a standard that I think has helped me. I think I'm not really equipped to comment on this subject until I can state the arguments against my conclusion better than the people on the other side. If you do that all the time, if you're looking for disconfirming evidence and putting yourself on a grill to make, that's a good way to help remove ignorance. What happens is that every human being tends to believe way more than he should in what he's worked hard to find out or what he's announced publicly that he already believes. In other words, while we shout our knowledge out, we're really pounding it in, we're not enlarging it. And I was always aware of that, and so I've accepted these damned annual meetings. I'm pretty quiet.
Ron L. Has a question about Gene Abegg. Gene Abegg seems like he was one of the best bankers of the last century, achieving both extremely low loan loss rates and earning around 2% on assets over a long time period. I think the bankers of today could learn a lot from Gene, but little is known of him. Question: how did Gene achieve incredibly low loan losses over the long term while so many other bankers have failed miserably?
Well, that is an easy one. He was a very smart man. He lived in a particular town. He knew everybody and everything. He had excellent judgment. He cared terribly about not making bad loans or incurring dumb expenses. So he was just a perfect banker if you wanted never to have any trouble. And of course, it really helped to know everybody in town. If I had stayed in Omaha, where I was raised, and gone into the banking business, I would have been a hell of a good banker. Because even as a boy, I knew a lot about who was sound and who wasn't sound in Omaha. And that's the way Gene was in his community. Furthermore, he'd gone through the Great Depression. He'd been a receiver for a bank. Well, of course, that made him very leery of dumb loans. And of course, he hated costs. He was just a very old-fashioned sound thinker. And of course, that will still work. But it's hard for anybody else to, he really knew everything you had to avoid credit losses in a small town in Illinois.
Charlie, Chris Demetra, he asks, you've spent much of your life contributing your wisdom to schools and hospitals. How would you advise these institutions to manage their endowments over the coming decades?
Well, the one charitable institution where I have had some influence for a very long time has a whole bunch of hotshot financiers in every branch of wealth management there is on the board. And that institution has two assets in its endowment accounts. One is a big interest in Li Lu's China fund, which is a limited partnership, and the other is a Vanguard index fund. And the result of holding those two positions, we have way lower costs than anybody else, and we make more money than practically everybody else. So you now know what I do in charitable institutions. By the way, that's not the normal outcome in America. The wealth management industry has a crisis on its hands. They really need the world to stay the way it is. And that isn't necessarily right for its customers.
Our next question comes from Randy Jeffs. It is estimated that the Gates Foundation has saved well over 100 million lives. Buffett's donations to the foundation has obviously helped to save many millions. Are Berkshire's managers aware that through their efforts to create business success at Berkshire, that they have been involved in saving millions of lives?
Well, I'm sure some are, but by and large, that's not what Warren is known for. He doesn't mind at all not getting credit for his charitable donations.
Any sort of wisdom, though, on what it takes to live a happy life? What are those kind of principles?
Oh yes, well, a happy life is very simple. The first rule of a happy life is low expectations. That's one you can easily arrange. And if you have unrealistic expectations, you're going to be miserable all your life. And I was good at having low expectations, and that helped me. And also, if when you get reverses, if you just suck it in and cope, that helps if you don't just fretfully stew yourself into a lot of misery. And then if there are certain behavioral rules, some of them, Rose Blumkin had quite an effect on the Berkshire culture, and she created a business with like 500 Depression dollars that became a huge business. You know what her mottos were? Always tell the truth and never lie to anybody about anything. And those are pretty good rules, and they're pretty simple. And a lot of the good rules of life are like that. They're just very simple. And do it right the first time, Lee Quinn. That's a really good rule.
I suppose we have time for one more question. It's been a year since the coronavirus pandemic came to the U.S. What have you all learned about running a business in the past year? Has there been anything that has surprised you? And what would be your best advice to someone starting a business now?
Well, I don't think I have a lot of wonderful advice about starting a business, but what we've learned in the pandemic is that we can do with a lot less travel and a lot more Zooming. And I don't think that when the pandemic is over, I don't think we're going back to just the way things were. I think we're into a lot less travel and a lot more Zooming, and I think the world is going to be quite different. A lot of the people who are doing this remote working, a lot of people are going to work 3 days a week in the office and 2 days a week at home. A lot of things are going to change. And I expect that, and I welcome it.